All right. So I'm with Kate Mior, or Hate Mior, as most people know her. Um, I've been trying to get this interview for a while now. So thank you for taking some time to speak with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Hello, everybody. Hello.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name's Kate. Go by DJ Hate Mior online on Twitch. Have had many monikers over the years. I was a street performer for about 20 years and semi-retired to open a store in Toronto. Terrible timing right before the pandemic.
Mm.
So now I am a Twitch DJ. That is the etymology of my career. 20 years down the drain, now online.
So when you say street performer, what exactly did you do?
I am. I still practice. I think my skills. I was a mime and clown,
Okay.
but European style street theater shows. I performed in cabarets across the world, circuses. I've done all kinds of corporate events, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But my love was always on the streets, and I kind of primarily engaged with street activations, street festivals, and hard street busking in various places around the world.
Yeah, I mean, before hearing you talk about it, I never really thought about street performing as a profession.
Yeah, and it is a very small profession globally.
Yeah.
We're not talking like thousands and thousands of performers. It is a certain kind of quality of
Hmm.
performance. And I mean, there's lots of wonderful people who, have gone on to have other careers that began as street performers, like Eddie
Yeah.
Izzard, of course.
Mm.
But it is a very, very niche industry,
Yeah.
and we tend to be very insular. And much of the draw of the job, at least for me, was always the anonymity. I
Mm.
could rock up to like a space, somewhere in the world, do my show, and then I could leave and leave people with the memories of the show, but not
Yeah.
necessarily know who I am and
Uh,
build a
okay.
following. So doing the transition online was a little challenging because you have a footprint, you have a digital
Right.
footprint, and the whole kind of premise of our career was, leave the space better than you found it. And
Okay. Yeah.
now I'm just like coming back to the same space every week to work, and it's just it's an interesting thing. It's cool.
Yeah.
It has its own advantages too.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely a bigger transition than like a lot of the DJs that I've talked to. For them, it's okay, it's a minor change in that they can't see the dance floor,
Yeah.
but then that gives them more freedom to play whatever they want, rather than having to worry about how many people are on the floor, how many people have come in the door, and whatnot. I
Yeah, it's
imagine.
funny because like I mean I used to DJ at club night. I was actually a DJ before this happened. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
I I was like, oh shit, I need to transfer skills. Like I had started DJing on a dare by a friend for his club night because he was doing a very ambitious club night that required a lot of kind of like consistency. So he was like, hey, I'm getting burnt out, and like, hey, you said you wanted to try it once. So I had already had a track record, and Darkness Forever, that I do with my DJ partner, Brutal
Right.
Trash, we had already been doing that for quite a while. And I was starting to bring my controller with me on tour
Mm.
when I was, in various places,
Yeah.
just be like, hey, can I get a guest spot one night? So, transitioning over to it was again not really that hard that way. Like you said, it's much more refreshing to be able to play what I want to play
Right.
as opposed to what will keep people on the dance floor. But we kind of already did that with Darkness Forever.
Yeah.
Like with Darkness Forever, we always had the mandate of like, fuck it, it's hamster dance o'clock, or whatever, just because our show was kind of the jokey, goth
Okay.
night.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it is less pressure to worry about making quotas at the bar.
Right. Right. Yeah. So since we're talking about music, I ask everybody, what does music mean to you?
Oh man, I hate questions like that because they're so fucking broad strokes.
Yeah.
And as somebody who does shows, about musicology, music history, and talking about the etymology of some culture and music.
Those are really interesting when I'm able to catch them.
It's one of those things that I always find really like, it's like, what is art to you? Those kinds of questions are very difficult to answer, and it's also very highly subjective.
Yeah.
Like whenever somebody asks me the question, what's art? Being an arts industry worker for like my entire life, I've never had a day job outside of being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I always find that question really irritating because it's like, well, it's my profession and it's something you take seriously as a profession. Some people would argue it's me experimenting with my feelings and whatever. It's like music to me would be, a mathematical, exemplification of expression through sound and, auditory experience. Because I think that music can be a lot of things. Music can be in the absence of sound, like John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds.
Right.
To me, it is still a piano piece.
Right.
Music is industrial music. It's test department playing with fucking pots and pans and running shit through distortion filters. Yep. I think music has a very broad definition, but it does have rules. You do need to follow certain form and structure to produce music. It's not just a pleasant sound. It's not just an experimental thing. It does have rules and structure. So okay. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, everybody has their own answer. And so it's curious just to see, how people answer it. What a lot of people just say is music is everything.
Yeah, that's too broad for me. It's just like saying,
Well, they start with that and then they get into more detail, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily everything because, I can't consume music to stay alive, to sustain my body.
Right.
And, to do my sweet games at the gym. I think music is very important. Music is obviously very important to me, but I wouldn't say it's everything. Well, I wouldn't say anything is everything, I was a circus performer and I don't love circus that much. So I'd be like, that's my whole life. Like, no, I have other interests outside of circus.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah. So one of the things that I've talked about in some of the other interviews, I kind of came to a conclusion because everybody talks about how music has been with us since the beginning of humanity, right? It permeates all cultures.
Yep.
It's one of those common elements of any society to have music, and it can be in any form, whether it is, like the John Cage or Test Department, or just beating on a rock or something. So I like to say that music is the Force, as in like Star Wars.
I dig that. Yeah. I would dig that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Another convert.
This is the way.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that music is part of, I guess, what brought you to Twitch, or was it, well, let me just back up. What exactly did bring you to Twitch?
Financial desperation, because I was out of work. I was paying for a storefront that my government was unclear. Mm-hmm. I was locked down, so I couldn't go to work, but they weren't supporting us financially. And, as my business effectively, I've had my company for a very long time, but I really took it seriously about 3 or 4 years ago. So having a storefront for 2 years, the 2-year mark is always the shittiest time. It's the make or break time.
Yeah.
So, I was kind of like, well, I need to fucking make money because I don't have any of my jobs anymore. And, but also for me, it was a deep sense of service to my community. As a street performer, my personal philosophy has always been, to keep people happy and entertained, to make accessible art so everybody can experience it, not just the bourgeois or the fucking elitist or, people going out in galleries seeing high art. And also to keep morality, keep morale up, keep spirits up.
Oh yeah.
And I thought if I were to go online and to start a program that could get everybody, juiced and jazzed and excited to stay home, or while they're staying home to do something fun, then it would encourage people to stay home and stay, safe and not be an idiot and go out, or, not mire in their misery. And that's really how the show Day Drunk started, was literally just a, fuck it, you guys, everything sucks. Let's fucking get day drunk. Oh, And then when I started to craft and build the show, I had a very specific idea in mind for it. I wanted the show itself to be very inspired by MTV, 90s MTV. We've had all these grand ideas of like building our own animated interstitials in between and really make it that zany, fucking off the wall, classic mid 90s MTV thing. Because I don't know about you in Canada, like when, you were homesick, when you were a teenager, you sat and watched MTV or YTV all day and all those, off the wall, like liquid television and shit like that. So that's kind of what I wanted Day Drunk to have the feel for, that we were just creating this environment where if you stumbled into it, you're like, well, if I'm not drunk already, it's time to get drunk now.
Yeah. So when you are taking swigs from the bottle, that actually is
vodka.
Yeah. Okay.
Solichnia Vodka, the sponsor of Day Drunk.
Actually, speaking of Stoli, I just as a complete aside, I was in the military in the late 80s, early 90s, stationed in Germany. And before I left in 93, I took a trip to Russia, which was at the time the part of the Commonwealth of Independent States. If you remember that short time period, right? And I brought back a couple of bottles of the original Stoli. I still have one.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Made, right? That they're not even, quite round, but
yeah.
But yeah, that's cool that I have it. And
it was so funny that Stoli became the official drink of that show. Because like I just remember the first Day Drunk, which by the way, I got really fucking hammered because that was before we figured out you could limit like people buying you drinks and shit. So that was just a shit show, that show. But I just remember like Stoli was the only thing we had in the house. Cause like my partner and I mean, like I drink it socially. I'm not a home drinker. Mm-hmm. I don't really drink at home. So like we didn't really have much by the way of alcohol. We had this like probably a really old bottle of Stoli. We're like, yeah, sure, let's go with this. And now it's like, oh, okay. So every week I'm fucking drinking Stoli. Occasionally, like when we're doing like an alternate universe show or like April Fools, I'll use that as an excuse to change it up because I personally prefer whiskey. Like I'm a whiskey drinker normally.
Oh yeah.
And like Scotch. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe 1 week when we're doing the alternate reality where I'm wearing a mustache, I'm the evil version of myself. Like we'll drink Jameson, but
yeah. Well, Jameson's not Scotch.
No, it's not. No, that's a whiskey. That's an Irish whiskey.
Yes.
But no, I don't discriminate with my whiskeys and scotches. Even the cheap Scotch is still good to me.
I became a bit of a whiskey snob years ago, but actually that's part of how I got my job here.
Oh, cool.
So I'm at the college I teach at. I came down for a workshop. And just to learn about this data set. And the two guys that were organizing it would take us out for dinner. And then they also had like a party at their house. And they're both Scotch snobs. So one guy actually did his PhD in Scotland. The other one just, has been Scotch snob for decades. And I came back from that conference saying I learned more about Scotch than I learned about the data.
Yeah, I didn't actually know much about Irish whiskey because I used to drink a lot more Scotch than whiskey.
Yeah.
And I was in Dublin on tour at a festival, and I usually like every morning I used to go for a run. So I would get up early and I would go for a run around Dublin, and I was like, doing my little lap around Grafton Street. I think it was Grafton Street, probably the foot of Grafton Street near Trinity College. And so I'm like, running and I just kind of like stop and kind of see this door open. I guess it was the beginning of the day. They're taking out all their stuff, and they're like, free tasting here. And I was like, yeah, why not? So I backed up and kind of like walked in, and I was chatting with the sales clerk, and they were like, oh, you're here for the World Street Performers Championships. Oh my God, that's so amazing. We're going to come and see you on the weekend. And here, try some of this. And they ended up like really like giving me a proper tasting. Like, have you ever done a whiskey tasting before? And I'm like, no, I drink scotch. I like peaty, that kind of stuff. And they were like, well, we don't really do that with Irish whiskey, but try some of this. And if you like that, then you're going to like this. And I ended up getting like a little hammered at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, like 10 o'clock in the morning. Ran back to my hotel room, and I was just like, whoa, I got to fucking find out for a little bit.
Yeah. So I want to segue back to talking about your business.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know you do. You have like a clothing line.
Yep.
Is that what your business, your storefront is, or it's a store something different?
So basically, how we operate, my company's called Bone and Busk, and I started making corsets like almost 20 years ago, and did it online. Like, I used to sell very well through LiveJournal. My old company name used to be Totally Wasted. So a lot of people still remember that name because my company was quite big online at the time with that name. And then when I rebranded, when I started taking the business more seriously and was developing a clientele base that was a lot more mature than what I was trying to attract, I had to rebrand. And there was also an issue with some fucking company in the States that registered Totally Waste. It was fine though. I didn't want that name anymore. But it was kind of like the dick move where you're like, oh man, that was my identity for like ever. But when I rebranded, it ended up being a better move because I expanded into making clothing. So it wasn't just bespoke corsetry or made to measure corsetry. It was now, we have a ready to wear line, we have a ready to wear clothing line, and we also do the bespoke and the high-end bridal. So, doing more of the bridal stuff, you kind of want a name that's a little bit more evocative to the bridal crowd. Yeah. So I figured Bone and Busk. I don't know, like on paper, my business shouldn't actually function because if you look at the metrics of like how the sales work, it's literally broken down into like 30% corsetry sales, 30% ready to wear clothing sales, and then 30% high-end bridal, and then 10% whatever else, like custom, like fetish wear or whatever. Like it literally shouldn't work on paper. And I'm surprised, to be honest, I've lasted this long during the fucking pandemic, having a very broad strokes business model. But
that kind of violates the Pareto principle.
Yeah, it really does. But I mean, it's unfortunately how you kind of have to spin it.
Oh yeah.
When you're ethical, like when I only produce my products in Canada, so like all of the clothing is made either in-house by me and my team, or before times my team, now me, or a small batch manufacturer that I work with in Toronto, or a small batch manufacturer that I work with in Montreal. And you don't really make a profit off of, if you have a storefront. If you do direct sales to trade shows, which is what I was doing for a few years before we opened the store, you can totally have a sustainable business on that model because it's direct sales. But if you have to include proper retail markup, we have as a culture just been so conditioned to treat clothing and food with such disrespect and treat it like, it should be free, and not really thinking about what it takes to grow your food or what it takes to produce your garments. Right. It's nobody's going to pay what they should be paying for one of my coats. So I price them for direct sale market and maybe make up the real estate in the store. But the bulk of what we do to actually make money and keep the staff in-house functioning, or did before the pandemic, was the high-end bridal.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be your cash cow.
Yeah. Like even corsetry is a loss leader, because I'm competing against every corset maker. Like I'm the only standalone corset store in Toronto. Like the only one. Yeah, there's a fetish store, but there's not a store that specifically does what we do in Toronto. And because I'm competing against most people who are corset brands operate out of their houses, so they have no overhead, and they're doing it more as a hobby job as opposed to an actual business model. So the corsetry, I just assume, is the loss leader, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when you go to cons, you know, you see there's always at least one vendor there that's selling corsets. Yeah.
It used to be me 20 years ago. I used to do the fan expo and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were until in the before times we would go down to Atlanta for Dragon Con.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So my wife vends. In fact, that's what she's doing right now. She's at a show, which I kept telling her not to do because, you know, it's in person.
Yeah.
But she's like, all right, you know, I'm putting up this plastic sheet. I've got at least the first, you know, vaccine shot. I've got, you know, keeping as much, you know, distance as possible. Everybody's supposed to be wearing masks. So
supposed to.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll go well, because this will be their, you know, her first actual show in over a year.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, all my trade shows are just fucked. Like everything is just fucked. I think the one of a kind show said that they were going to potentially do an in-person show in December or November, but they haven't released any details yet. And last year was a bit of a clusterfuck, so I don't even know if I'm still even part of their system anymore. And like that's a pretty big show because they have one in Chicago as well. It's the same company, Informa, that runs it. And the one in Toronto used to be Monster. That's where I would get all my wholesale clients. You know, that's where we would get a lot of exposure. That's how I was able to open my store, was because of that show.
Yeah.
And when we had to move virtual last year, it was just a disaster. So I'm kind of like, is my tenureship done with them? I don't know. It all did, like everything's just so up in the air. But every other trade show is just pretty much canceled this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a, you know, a con.
Yeah.
So a Comic-Con, small one, but my wife actually did better once the pandemic hit, because everybody turned online to start buying stuff.
Yeah. And did she have a really strong online presence beforehand?
Well, she's on Etsy.
Okay.
And she, you know, has been building up there for years. So this
I never could get Etsy to work.
No,
I still my Etsy store is still, I've maybe made like in the entire time I've had Etsy, probably like 40 sales.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why it just never worked for me, but that's good that she was able to do that, because I know Etsy is a pretty big platform.
Yeah. Well, she's gone through, you know, like watching everything, you know, advice on that, going, you know, discussion forums and talking to other people. And so, yeah, she knows like a lot of the little tricks of, you know, what's the best to do.
Yeah. I never really got on top of that. I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna make my own website.
Yeah. Well, she wants to do that now too. She wants to, because she has a website, she just doesn't use it.
Yeah, that was me up until the generous grant that I received from the Digital Main Street, BIA Parkdale. Thank you very much for that grant to help build a website that actually works. And even still, I struggle with it. Like, I'm sold out of some items online that I know I have in stock, but I just don't know how to like restock it.
Oh,
because I'm special that way. Like, how did I even manage to open a store with my lack of business acumen?
That's actually norm. Most people that start businesses are not business people. So I mean, so I teach entrepreneurship in a business school, and most of my students are business students, and I tell them business students are probably the worst entrepreneurs.
Yep, I can see that.
What business school teaches you to do is how to work for somebody else.
Right.
How to do their accounting, how to do their marketing, you know, all that kind of stuff. Not, you know, how do you solve, you know, problem every 5 minutes where there's no actual manual, there's no boss to turn to, you know, there's no department of whatever to.
It's an interesting dichotomy, you know, like I have a friend who went to LSE, and we've, you know, talked a lot about entrepreneurship. He really helped me build my business plan for, you know, in preparation for opening my store.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how there is this kind of like, you get three kinds of like entrepreneurs. You'll get the entrepreneur that is passionate about a product or passionate about their craft. You get the entrepreneur that is passionate about owning a business and doesn't really care about what they're selling, just that they have, like, I want a coffee shop because I love the idea of a coffee shop. And then you get the entrepreneur who's like, I'm here to make money and I want to maximize whatever the business venture is to make the money. And it's a really interesting, and you can tell when you step into an establishment who the business owner is, what their, you know, what their thought process is, and what their interest levels lie in.
Well, I would say that a large percentage of the entrepreneurs are more accidental.
Yeah.
That they had a need and they started filling it, and other people said, "Hey, can I get some of that?" Right, and then it just blows up from there.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of, I started learning corsetry just when I was, you know, like your classic story of every fucking, you know, alternative designer. Like, I couldn't afford it when I was a teenager. I wanted to wear it, so I learned how to make it myself. And so I started making corsets as a little bit of a side hobby when I was younger. And then when I started touring full time, my lifestyle was like 6 months on the road, 6 months off the road. What do I do in my 6 months off the road? I'm at the gym 6 days a week anyway, trying to stay fit for going back on tour. But what else am I going to do with my day? And I know it sounds kind of like, you know, privileged, and it is privileged to say that, you know, I was able to have so much free time to dedicate to building a business slowly. So when I was on my 6 months off tour, I would post to LiveJournal or wherever the internet happened to be at the time. I'm dating myself, and just say, hey, I'm open for bookings between these dates, and I can fulfill them by these dates before I go back out again. And I would be, you know, slowly filling in orders that way. And then when, you know, about 4 years ago now, God, I can't, like, this pandemic is just like, oh yeah, we lost a year of our lives. So about 4 years ago, I was kind of getting off of touring really, really heavily. And I was starting to see the real wear and tear mentally and physically of like being on the road so much. And my partner and I kind of talked about like, so what's our future? Like, what's happening? Is this our life? You know, like, is this it for the next, I mean, we've been together for like 10 years at that point, but it was like, yeah, no, this is my lifestyle. But I can see that this lifestyle is kind of starting to wear thin. I want to be able to go do shows because I like to, not because I have to. And I've always loved doing shows. And it got to the point where I was so burnt out that I was just doing them because I had to.
Yeah.
And that's never a good experience for you or your audience.
Right.
So my partner was like, you know, you're doing really well with the One of a Kind show. And like, you're really building your clientele. You've got a studio space. At one point I had sponsorship. I was published by British Vogue. And so he was kind of like, you've got all of this stuff, you know, to kind of put together, like maybe open a store. And I was like, I would love to open a store. And so I kind of opened my atelier. So we do a lot of the production in store. So the back area is cordoned off for a production studio. And then we have a showroom in the front. That's also retail. So you can buy shit and you can walk out. We've even got ready to wear corsets. If you just want to, if you've never bought one before and you don't want to spend, you know, $500 or $600 on a custom piece, then like, you can walk out that day with something. And yeah, we just kind of just went from there. To me, it was always my art, because when you're a street performer, you have to compromise being your artistic integrity to a certain degree, because you are appealing to the lowest common denominator. You have kids in the audience. I can't just do, you know, blue comedy the whole time. And you know, there are limitations imposed by just the spaces you work in. You have a 45-minute time constraint because that's the general rule of how long you can be on the pitch, as we call where we work, especially when you're working with other people. And I was kind of just getting over you know, making art. I love my show, but I understood it was limiting. And, you know, going into my sewing studio, blasting some awesome music and fucking draping shit, like that to me was like my expression and my artistic vision, because I'm not the world's best mime. I'm an okay clown. I'm funny. I get the job done. I can get hired, and I'll make any booker proud when I go out on stage and I do one of my polished routines. But I'm never gonna fucking you know, become Rob Torres. It's just not. I'm a female as well, identifying individual, or a female presenting individual. So there's a ceiling. A friend of mine who was a creation clown with Cirque du Soleil for over 10 years got fired 2 weeks before their opening night on a certain show. Allegedly got fired because allegedly the owner of the big circus company that is global said the world isn't ready for a female clown lead. Like, it's just the harsh reality of that industry. So, you know, rather than continue in training and become the world's best mime artist that nobody fucking cares about, I thought, you know, fashion's fun. I love it. I love being able to create things. It's like sculpting. You can still be artistic. You can still be intellectual with it. When you do runway shows, you can really make it theatrical. So that's kind of where I went with the fashion, was like, this is my art and I'm going to make a business out of it because this is smart.
Well, I'm one of the reasons why I like entrepreneurship and I like teaching it, is that it is sometimes the last resort or only resort for marginalized people.
Absolutely.
In whatever way.
I never wanted to be a street performer. I started street performing out of desperation as a teenager. You know, I didn't think it would ever be a career.
Yeah. So like one of the things we say in entrepreneurship is, if you can't get a job, make your own. Right.
Yeah.
And you know, that's usually like, all right, the college grad who can't, you know, quite get the job he wants. But the reality is more of everybody else that can't get a good job because of their gender, or the color of their skin, or their, you know, religion, or whatever it might be.
I don't think I ever successfully quit a job. I think I've always, like when I was like, you know, a kid, I think I got fired from every fucking job I ever had because I was just not employable. You know, I just always wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah, and that's typically what entrepreneurs are. They're not really suited for working for other people.
Yeah, so I mean, I could do it and I could do it well, but I always got like let go for not fitting in with the culture. I didn't want to fucking go to the you know, the pep rally bullshit. I didn't like, just let me fucking do my job. I'll do my job well. I'll do it with a smile, but like, don't expect me to go for drinks with you guys after. I don't fucking like you. Like, come on. We're just here because we work together, you know?
Yeah. So I had a speaker years ago come in, and I mean, he's South Carolina, so, you know, he's conservative and all, but one of the things that, you know, he would say is one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is you create the culture you want.
Yeah.
Not the culture that the company tells you to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I fostered, at least, I mean, I can barely remember now because, you know, letting everybody go in March last year was kind of the shittiest thing ever. And also, like, I mean, I admit, like, I'm not really a great boss in terms of the hierarchical structure. I'm very much a like, hey, let's all work together. You know, like, I'll take your ideas into consideration. Cool. You think we should do this? Awesome. Let's do that instead.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I always created, I strove to create an environment where I primarily wanted to focus on hiring women, young women, marginalized women, and I wanted to make sure, or people who have just had shitty marginalized experience growing up, who were low income, who didn't have access, you know, because fashion is kind of an elitist industry. You know, I have had so many doors closed to me simply because I did not have the funding to continue to do a circuit junket of like runway shows.
Yeah.
I can't, when I did Vancouver Fashion Week, where I got published by British Vogue, I was eating grilled fucking cheese sandwiches and chatting up the wait staff because I identified with them more than I did half the people I should have been hobnobbing with.
Right.
Because that industry is so fucking garbage.
Yeah.
And very, very much a barrier to entry into that. And I know I fucked up my, my chances with, the hobnobbing because I was hanging out with the wait staff, but they were nice. And everybody else I was talking to were fucking assholes, you know? And I wanted to hire people to give them an experience in fashion where they didn't have to be bougie assholes. They could just be themselves.
And that's a great thing. It's actually a great selling point. So one of my proudest, I want to say achievement, but I mean, it's one of my students, had him in 3 classes, and between 2 classes back to back. So I taught a ecopreneurship class, which that semester was focused on water and, all kinds of problems with water. And then a social entrepreneurship class. In that process, he started a company. He's from Ecuador. He started a company taking denim scraps and making jean jackets. But he's hiring women from small villages in Ecuador that had no other income to make it. And then, so helping them, get the equipment they need, helping them learn sewing if they didn't already know it. And then the big thing he does is every jacket has a little patch inside with the name of the woman that sewed it.
That sounds cool in theory. Like I always feel like such an asshole whenever we get into topics of discussion on this, because the relationship between fast fashion and slow fashion, even slow fashion, let's be honest here, and exploitation and consumerism and environmentalism, it's so intersectional. And it's like, when I hear stories like that, it's always like, this is a feel-good story because these people are being helped out. But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, but you're still selling those jackets probably for a profit margin that you are definitely capitalizing on. And the quality of life of those people probably is marginally better, but they're still the ones doing all of the labor. Like, I was in Sierra Leone in West Africa about 10 years ago. And my crew and I kind of, full disclosure, we were doing some work with an NGO, but the NGO that we were working with, or my friend started, was a direct to beneficiary, which I hate that fucking term, but a direct to individual support system. So we were basically lobbying the Canadian government, the British government, on behalf of already established businesses in Sierra Leone that were African owned, not white NGO owned, and helping to legitimize and give them financial support, because people just don't want to trust an African entrepreneur. Right. They want it to be attached to a big NGO. So we kind of facilitated the ability to get orphanages and a rice farm and all of this kind of stuff, off the ground without the interference of like white NGOs telling Africans what they should be doing with their money.
Yeah.
So we stumbled into this space, and it was clearly they were from Copenhagen, so they were from Denmark, and it was a woman-run sewing studio employing African women. And the whole feel-good story was that they were making these handbags that they're selling in a cafe in Denmark. And the practical reality is there was no money coming back in. Mm-hmm. And the even more bizarre thing, having spent, we spent already at this point a long time in West Africa, and we were also working directly with people. We were learning the language, and we were, actually kind of having direct one-on-one experiences with individuals. So like we kind of clocked this sewing studio as like, oh, you're all related to each other and you're taking advantage of these like Danish girls. This is hilarious. And so they were doing this like, oh yeah, we have a program where we're teaching them English, and look at us being so like kind. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, all these women fucking speak English. Like, they're totally trolling you. This is amazing. So it was kind of like, oh, you think you're doing something really feel good. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you're just like, there's these layers of inequality are kind of showing, and like you're so oblivious to how you're being taken advantage of, and you're treating these people like a charity case, and that's embarrassing,
there is definitely a lot of that, but these guys are actually from Ecuador.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're the women that they work with are heavily highlighted on their website. And to me, one of the most amazing stories, and it's not the right word, amazing, but was, he said, the first jacket they made, and with the name of the woman that so put it together,
Yeah.
being on there, they brought in like the whole family, and like everybody was looking at and like seeing, and they started crying. It's like, oh my God, getting recognition for doing something.
Well, that's the thing. Like, stitchers should get more recognition, and they should be paid more adequately for what they do, because they're the ones assembling the garments.
Right.
Like, designing a garment, if you're a designer, it's not really hard, but assembling a garment, like, full disclosure, if you saw the sample of my wild coat, which is kind of our biggest product, if you saw the sample I fucking made versus the one that my factory makes, I can't make a welt pocket. We're shit. I know how to draft one, but I can't make it. We're shit. Definitely not up to production standards. And it's infuriating. Like, when I hire corset stitchers, they get hired at the same rate I pay myself, because they are specialists in what they do, and they should be paid and compensated adequately for that. And the whole industry is just so predicated on exploitation from the ground up that it's impossible to make the profits that you're supposed to, when you actually break down how a garment's supposed to be made. And when you get your production made, so my question, I guess, for the student is, so they're from Ecuador, where are they selling their products? Are they selling it in the US?
Yes, at a very high price.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're still making their profit margins.
Right. But that also means that they are able to pay the women well.
Yeah. Well, for their standards. And that's the thing. That's where it becomes this balancing act of, like, sure, they're being paid well for Ecuador standards, but if I were to make those jackets with my Toronto stitchers in our factory, I'd probably have to charge 3 times what he's paying, or what he's charging. So it's a kind of delicate balancing act, because you want to support people, and you want to reach out to marginalized communities, and you want to create an egalitarian exchange. Yeah. But I feel like within our current capitalist system, it's never going to be an egalitarian exchange. There's always going to be somebody profiting off of the labors of others. Yeah. And I'm still trying to figure out a way to not make that happen. And I mean, I'm not profiting at all. So clearly my way is not working, but
going way back in my younger years, and reading on political science, including Marx and all that, I thought that actually what is ultimately the most socialist is pure entrepreneurship. Everybody owns their own business.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I kind of agree.
Yeah, if everybody owns their own means of production, then that's what it is.
But the practical reality is that not everybody. Right. You need hands. Like, right. I've been doing all of the work myself for the last year, I guess now a year and a half, because I can't afford to hire my staff. And I can't keep doing that. Like, I just can't keep doing it. It's just impossible. Like, I'm going to burn out. I'm going to get carpal tunnel syndrome. I can't do cutting, assembly, marketing. I can't do it all myself. I just think there needs to be a more equitable way to seize the means of production. I personally think, and I've been lobbying, that our government needs to be both of our governments need to be subsidizing local manufacturing, because that's the only way we can compete against the H&Ms and the, Walmarts or whatever. Like, the bigger overarching problem with the slow fashion versus the fast fashion movement is it's an intersectional argument. You can't fault poor people for buying fast fashion because that's all they can afford. Right. Lots of people I know want to buy my product. They want to buy quality. They want to buy locally made, well-made garments, but they can't afford it. And they should be able to afford it. Right. The other option, the other glaring problem is sizeism. Like for me to produce, now me as Bone and Bus doing corsetry, I do not charge extra for plus size. I never fucking charge anybody for extra material or whatever hidden bullshit they do. When I'm making my garments that I make myself, anybody has access to them. A lot of people don't know that because our ready-to-wear clothing only goes up to a 2XL because my manufacturer dings me. If I try to produce a line where I can go up to 3XL, they're like, well, it's going to be X amount per unit and you have to buy a minimum of X units. And I'm like, well, we just can't afford that.
Right.
And I think if our government started subsidizing small batch manufacturing and started supporting our initiatives and started giving us bigger grants or actual any kind of grants, I know that Quebec does a lot of grant giving to the fashion industry. Ontario doesn't even recognize fashion in any way. And then when the pandemic hit, I got an email from the city of Toronto asking if we can pivot to produce PPE. And I'm like, we don't have the machines to do the volume you want. Like, I'd love to, but like, we can't. My manufacturer, here's her name, here's her number, go to her. And it's like, it's all fine and dandy for the government to treat us like, we're just discardable. But as soon as the pandemic hit, they're like, well, why can't you? We need like 100 units of masks. Why can't your stitchers do this? Like, and then, the guy from Canada Goose retrofits his fucking factory in Calgary, all for PPE, and he's lauded as Canada's, PPE savior. Like, bitch is a billionaire. Yeah. Of course he can afford to pivot and retrofit his fucking, factory. I think we just need more support on the low level. And unfortunately, given what our government's done for small business, I have no faith that it's ever going to change. I mean, they didn't even think about us for rent subsidy until about 3-4 months later into the pandemic, when so many businesses were going out of business. It was ridiculous. And the government started to really realize that main streets are fucking dying at a ghastly rate because they were so inept,
What I think we need is not necessarily government, and I'm not saying this in that conservative, government is bad kind of thing, but more connections. So one of the things that I've been following a lot lately is there's this movement, a small movement within entrepreneurship about systems-led leadership.
Right.
Or systems-led change, with the idea that a lot of entrepreneurship, we what one woman calls heropreneurship. We worship, these entrepreneurs that save the day, when in reality, there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah.
It's not just one person.
And usually there's a lot of money involved,
right?
But not everybody has access to.
Right. And very often what's happening is a reinventing of the wheel, a working against the existing solutions, rather than bringing them all together to make a better whole.
Well, that's it. Like, I feel like we just constantly are spinning our wheels. And specifically with fashion, one of the biggest problems is the framing of what organic or ethical or environmentally friendly means, or even the concept of slow fashion. The term slow fashion is defined as small batch manufacturing made locally, domestically, knowing the provenance of the materials you're using, so you can identify and know ethically. And again, ethically sourced is another buzzword that is often quite viciously co-opted. I know of a company that produces slow fashion corsetry in Bangkok, and they call it slow fashion. That's not fucking slow fashion.
Yeah.
Just because they make 26 pieces per production run doesn't mean it's slow fashion. If you're wasting the water and the resources, and the money and the airplane fuel to fly to Bangkok every fucking 6 months, that's not slow fashion. Slow fashion is knowing the direct link between your raw materials, your manufacturing process, and your sales. All of our fabrics we source within Canada, except for our coutil, which is a very specific fabric for corsetry that we source from the UK, because there are 2 mills, one in the UK and one in fucking Germany. if we could produce coutil domestically, I would purchase it domestically, but we can't. And I think that people are confused. Like there's conflation everywhere of like, oh, this is hemp, it's organic, it must be good for the environment. But no, that hemp is just as bad as cotton, which uses so much fucking water in its production that it's not sustainable. You know, like it's so difficult to find sustainable stuff. A friend of mine did a fashion show a couple of years ago, and it was a sustainable environmental fashion show. And the fabric they got that was the sustainable fabric was the most god awful fucking like terrible shit. It couldn't hold its shape. She was losing her shit trying to work with it. She kept like texting me like, why did I do this fashion show? This fucking fabric sucks. And it was like disintegrating on her. Like, wow. It's just, we need, because I'm Canadian and I'm all socialist. I feel like we need government support. We need the government to step in. We need the government to, you know, fucking support and have the balls to say, we support manufacturing domestically. We want people to have access to Canadian made products. We need to subsidize wages, fabric production, or purchasing, or whatever they can do to help us knock our prices down to be competitive. Yeah. You know, it's just a mess otherwise. Yeah. Well, and it's not used in this way, but there's this concept of the triple helix of government, business, and universities. Yeah. And that's usually about commercializing technology, but I think it could be very beneficial just in everything in terms of. So if you look at like systems change, and you look at what are those levers of change, right? One of the easiest of the upper level ones. So that, you know, they're kind of ranked, right? So there's the really low that barely makes a change to completely changing, you know, everybody's mindset, right? Which like is happen, right? Recycling straws versus getting all the fucking leftover fishing nets out of the oceans. Or just, you know, not needing straws. Yeah. Right. But in there, the one that I usually push my students to think about as a lever is the information flows. Right. And that's one where, you know, if somebody knew this, it would completely change everything. And that I find that so often that seems to me like one of it's almost like a low-hanging fruit of systems change. Right. Right. So that's why I like this idea of government, universities, business working together, sharing information in some way, or just sharing information, period. We definitely need to do more of that. If it's one thing the beginning of the pandemic taught me, is that our government literally has no idea how businesses work. And I think by extension, they had no idea how many of us were gig workers and how many of us actually worked in these industries that have been decimated. You know, like I primarily never made my income within Canada. You know, Canada's not a country if you are a performing artist. If you're a performing artist or a musician, you fucking leave Canada. And that's what I did. I live here, but I never really relied on being here to make an income. The government had no idea. I mean, I pay my taxes and I outline everything and I do everything above board because I'm almost fucking 40 years old and I'm a responsible adult. But when the pandemic hit and gig workers like me were not considered part of the rollout of the financial support, and we were like, hi, like I literally pay my taxes and I've been doing this forever. Mm-hmm. This has been my career. You know, like I performed at your fancy Canada Day ceremony in fucking, you know, Ottawa. You know I exist. And I just think they were not prepared to realize that a lot of us actually made a living off of it. And so often I think that in Canada, I don't know about the States so much because you do have a culture of like, well, it's weird in the States because you have the culture of like, you're either a starving artist or a celebrity. There's really nothing in between. Mm-hmm. I think Canada has a little bit more of a nuance of understanding that there are middle-class artists that work. But I don't think they realized how many of us existed. Yeah. You know, we're either discarded as like, you're just a hobbyist or you're like, oh, okay, you're an arts worker.
And that's where information flow also comes in, right? So
Yeah.
it's when it comes to government, they're they're still operating based on the information they receive. And where there's more money, there's more information,
Yeah, I
right?
agree. I mean,
So
and this is why I have problems with legislative bodies like the Canada Arts Council and the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council. I think that they're fucking outdated structures that should not fucking exist anymore. I think they do more harm for the arts than they've ever done to support the arts in our country. I have very strong opinions about the quality of art that they produce and that they support, and the how they've really illegitimized certain art forms, like stand-up comedy, for example.
mm,
Like, we're the country that birthed fucking Jim Carrey, like him or not. He was a he was a stand-up comedian. Like,
yeah,
he left Canada because he couldn't get any support. Circus arts didn't even make it onto the grant radar until 2010. Cirque du
wow,
Soleil had already been a fucking multi-billion-dollar industry
yeah,
before we got recognition. I used to try and apply for grants from the Canada Arts Council, never got one in my life, by the way.
wow,
Um, and I would apply as a dance practitioner because mime is tangential to dance. So that would be the only way I could get a grant to produce new material, would
yeah,
be literally through fucking dance. When we have Cirque du Soleil operating internationally, that's a joke. Like, when you have these bodies like the Canada Arts Council, they become an incestuous,
yeah,
we decide what we think art is, and we're going to illegitimize everything outside of that. And then all the government knows is what they tell them. So the government has no idea that
right,
Canada was one of the leading countries for street performing festivals globally in the late 80s, early 90s, even into the 2000s when I was working, in the late 90s, early 2000s when I started working. We were the top country for street theater festivals. We outshone Europe in terms of
yeah,
the quality, the breadth and the depth, the length of the festivals, and the artists that were brought over here.
yeah,
And like nobody even knows.
right.
Like nobody
Again,
is have no fucking clue.
information flows really,
Yeah.
it's
And it's
amazing.
hard when
Yeah,
when these arts company or these arts
yeah,
bodies, these governing bodies tell the government, oh no, we have our fingers on the pulse.
right.
These people are illegitimate. Like, you don't even want to talk to them.
Well, see,
It's bananas.
this is where social media, and the ease of making simple infographics and memes can come in really handy.
Yeah.
Right. So, right, I was just talking with a woman locally here in Charleston the other day. She's 68 years old. She was one of the first, African American women to, attend a white school here, and, you know, first African American, working in this job and that job and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But then, now she's, unemployed, can't get a job. But she also was talking about how when she was young, Charleston was full of Black-owned businesses. And now downtown, there's basically none. And the ones that are there are actually kind of in hiding. They don't announce that they are actually Black-owned,
Yeah.
right? Yet we have the International African American Museum coming open here in Charleston in sometime next year. So I'm suggesting that what we do as as a project of awareness is like have a little like art competition or something like that to show the history of Black-owned businesses over the 500-year history of Charleston.
Yeah. I'd
Right.
be curious to know why businesses are afraid to admit that they're Black owned right now. I mean, I don't
Very
really know all
simply,
of the nuances
yeah,
of the race relations in America. So, like, forgive my
yeah.
ignorance of, like, I ask
Yeah,
these
very
questions.
simply, what she said was that when there was a restaurant there in one building, and it had a Black name on it, it didn't do very well. And then once it became this
uber, vegan, very white.
Gentrified.
It did great.
Huh.
Right. And so they're concerned that if it's known as a Black owned building, even, that white people will not want to go there.
Yeah, that actually does make sense, because I'm thinking about it like in relation to our experience, like specifically with the restaurant industry, where if you are, if you're a Black or a marginalized individual owning a restaurant, that it's your cultural food, but fine dining, that's considered like, whoa, that's gentrified. I'm not going to eat there. I'm going to eat at the cheap place, because I believe all ethnic food should be cheap. In some relation, I guess I'm trying to find a comment. We don't have the history that America has, but I'm seeing similarities. Like in the neighborhood where my store is, it's a predominantly Tibetan community, and so there's a lot of Tibetan-owned restaurants, and it is a very impoverished community as well. There's we are of the postal codes that have been hit the hardest by COVID, and they're finally doing mobile vaccination trucks in the neighborhood where my shop is, and there are some young white hipsters try to open up a Momo place, which are Tibetan dumplings, if you don't know what they are, and they're like, oh yes, we're the Momo, we have an app, we have all of this, and it was just kind of like people were like, oh well, that's legitimate, so that's our fine dining experience now. And meanwhile, the restaurant that's right beside my store has a beautiful fine dining interior. It's fantastic. I've taken my partner there on dates. I take friends there when we're having a fancy dinner. But like everybody else will treat it like, well, that's not the fine dining place. It's so weird.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah.
The answer is white supremacy, and it needs to be dismantled.
Absolutely. And that's why I get involved everywhere I can. I use my white male privilege everywhere I can.
Use it while you can. Infiltrate.
Yeah. I promote to my students that if you really want to see change, let's get some women elected to office.
Well, depending, because there is that social exclusion kind of phenomenon. If you're familiar with the term. I've been using it a lot lately. Social exclusion is a psychological term to describe when a marginalized person gets put into a position of power, and then they start punching down on other marginalized people in an effort to make themselves look like they're on the same level as the dominant structure. Of course, the reality is they're never on the same level as dominant structure, but they think by punching down they will be. And I see a lot of that happening in American and Canadian politics. Not so much now, because you've got some really great people like AOC in power. But in Canada, when we had the first female prime minister, it was a case of social exclusion where you're like, oh my God, or like Margaret Thatcher or whatever in Britain.
That's the history of America, is that that there was always a hierarchy, right? For going back to the beginning, with the plantation owners, right? Hiring people that were of lesser quality from Europe, right?
Right.
Whether they're, Irish or Eastern European or whatever, and then hiring them as the police to monitor, Africans, enslaved people, right? So there was always that, hierarchy, that there was somebody lower than you. That's the story of America.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, that is definitely also the story of Canada.
Yeah.
Especially with our relationships with Indigenous folks and Indigenous communities. I was actually very impressed with our government for pushing First Nations and Indigenous folks to the forefront for vaccinations. Because when SARS hit, the Stephen Harper government just sent body bags up to reserves.
Right. Yeah.
So at least we're doing a little bit better now, but I mean, we still have 500 years of atonement. To make amends for.
And that reminds me, the first time I saw you DJing was it was some festival. I don't know what it was. But it was definitely awareness oriented. And you did, and maybe it was a 30-minute set, but you did, oh my God, it was the best set I saw of this whole festival.
Oh, thank you.
But you featured a lot of a wide variety of artists.
Yeah,
And you
I
were
try to do
raising,
that.
yeah, you were raising money for something to help Indigenous people in
Oh, okay. So
Canada.
that was the Org Fest, the
Yes.
anti-racist
Yeah.
goths. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love that, that exposure to, music I hadn't heard before. And there's several DJs that do that, like MP3J Sark does a great job at that. I've learned so many bands that I would never have heard of anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that should be our job,
yeah,
is to
exactly.
introduce
Yeah.
people to music. Yeah, that was the festival I opened with A Tribe Called Red. And I think a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
were like, what is this?
Yeah. Yeah. And he plays them now too.
Nice.
Yes. He plays them, and he plays Backwash.
Yeah, Backwash is awesome.
Yeah.
Backwash is awesome. I think Peter plays more Backwash than me. We always have to draw straws on Darkness Forever who gets to play certain artists, because we both
Oh, yeah.
kind of play a lot of the same stuff. So we're like, okay, is that your week for this? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my friend Melody is an incredible violist, and they performed with the Tribe Called Red many years ago,
Mhm.
and that's how I got introduced to them. And we ended up hanging out with them after a show one night, and I was like, yeah, these guys fucking rock, man! Like, they're cool. I think DJ NDN ended up winning a DJ competition as well.
Mm.
So like, he's also an incredible DJ. I'd love to work with him as a DJ sometime.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw them a long time ago, and kind of always kept them in the back pocket. And I was like, I am going to bring this to the goth crowd. I just don't know how to do it yet. And then when that festival came, I was like, oh yeah, dropping that shit.
Yeah, that was great. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for appreciating that. It's always hard, especially when you're a DJ, trying to get people on board with ideas that are not just, hey, here's a Sisters of Mercy ripoff band you're gonna love. Like, like my DJ partner does a lot. He plays a lot of Backwash. He plays a lot of clipping. I play Echo Buzz as much as I can. And, I unapologetically fucking love Vaporwave, as you can tell from the background. And I really think there's a huge relationship between Vaporwave and goth, but lots of goths kind of like turn their nose up at it. And the goth scene tends to be very insular, and they love to listen to throwback shit and stuff that makes them feel like, they remember the 80s that never happened for them, because a lot of them are like a lot younger than us now. And I think it's really important.
The 80s.
I do too, but I was a child. But I still remember all of the fucking toy commercials. But and I think it's integral to the growth of the community and the scene to be more inclusive of music that is dark and that is fucking like amazing and needs to be like out there. I just discovered a couple of like this record label from Nigeria called Yegi Yegi, and they only put on experimental like noise music, and I fucking love noise music. I always tell my audience how much I love noise music, but I never play it because I don't want to lose viewers, because it's a very niche kind of thing. And there's an artist on their Kampala unit that's fucking amazing, and I'm always trying to find more interesting stuff that I like that's will be fitting to goths. Like, I don't think it's good enough to be like, I'm gonna have a checklist of countries and artists that I want to play music from. It's like, I want to find music that my audience will actually like. Right. That's coming from interesting places.
Can you say again what that label was?
It's called Nyegi Nyegi.
Okay.
I'll send you the link after.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when this airs, we'll post it in chat.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. That label is super fucking cool. Yeah. And again, it's not to everybody's taste. Some of it is unlistenable. It's like noise is kind of like the jazz of goth music. You either fucking love it or you're like, what the hell is this shit? Yeah. And there's some amazing artists on the Kampala unit. It's amazing. I went down the rabbit hole of listening to them. I was like, oh. Yeah.
Well, I'll say one of the things that I like what Sark does is he just blends it in.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what you have to do.
Right.
To get people on board.
Yeah. So it's not like, okay, here's our minority set of of music. No, it's all mixed.
Yeah, I have that
It's just
philosophy
part
as
of,
well
yeah.
because I used to hate getting invited to female only busker fests. Like, fuck off, hire me like when like don't tokenize me.
Right.
I understand that for some people that's super important to them and they want to have that. For me, I find that really fucking insulting. I just find it really ridiculous. And I certainly don't ever want any artist I play to feel tokenized or
Right.
that I'm only playing them because, this fulfills the mandate of, on June 4th last year, I did a whole Black focused day drunk. And it was 3 hours of not just here's The Cure because Andy Anderson fucking played with them for, a few years. Like, I found Black fronted goth and industrial and cold wave bands and played 3 hours of it. And it was actually born out of a conversation I was having with somebody who was like, I'd love to play more of that stuff. Like, what is that even? I want to play more of that stuff, but it's so hard to find artists. And I was like, bitch, hold my beer. I'm going to do a whole show.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a whole fucking show on this.
Yeah.
And I think it's like tokenizing just never, you can see through it, like it's, if you dig hard enough, it's like, I don't understand the mentality where people are like, I want to do a show that's like focused on this specific synthesizer with this specific fucking guitar pedal, or like, I'm only going to play, but it's too hard to find, music that I can throw into my sets and blend into my sets. It's too hard to do that. Like, come on.
Well, here's the trick that Sark said somebody taught him. If you want to discover new music, go into YouTube and clear your history.
Yeah.
Right. And then start with something.
Yeah, I know that
technique. Then go from there.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's why it's hard to discover, because we're basing our discoveries on the algorithms.
Yeah. Always clear your cookies and your cache. For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very fortunate because I have an extensive network of friends. So I'm always like, hey, what's going on? And like, let's send each other some shit. And like, let's reprogram our own brains. Like when I get super into my fucking synth wave, it's like, okay, it's been a long time since I've listened to some good death rock.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you listening to now? And like, we'll send each other like mixtapes, that kind of stuff, but I think it's not really hard finding new music. You just have to be disciplined in how you listen to music. I think a lot of people, when they're DJs, and again, I don't say everybody because there's a lot of amazing DJs out there, but from conversations I've had with some folks, I think there's like two schools of thought for DJing. It's like, are you an entertainer and an educator, or are you doing it for yourself and to make people happy? And I think that if you treat it like a job as an entertainer and an educator, you're more inclined to listen to music more critically than if you're doing it because you love it.
Yeah.
And you're just doing it because you want to feel good about, I want to feel good and I want everybody else to feel good. Right. So it's harder to kind of branch out. And I find that the DJs that really do treat their jobs like education and entertainment really do that extra work, and tend to be more open in what they'll play. Like I was having a conversation with Define.Human about techno EBM, and we were kind of like, okay, like, am I the only one who likes this? Because this is awesome. And then, we're both like, yes, no, this is awesome. This music is awesome. And it's like having that validation because nobody else is playing that stuff, And I found it really fascinating when the song Somber thing came out, because suddenly out of nowhere, all these DJs are like, I never fucking liked them in the first place. And I was like, interesting, because I don't like throwback music. Just full disclosure. If you sound like you're trying to sound like U2 from like Boy era, which I love that stuff. I do. I love it. I'm not gonna lie and say I hate U2 like everybody else lies and says they hate U2. If you're listening to post-punk now, you like old U2. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
But like, I would rather find techno EBM, which may or may not be goth, but it's doing something interesting and forward thinking and progressive. I'd rather play that than a band that sounds like Sisters of Mercy, you know? Like we've already had that. And I love Sisters of Mercy. I still like them. We end the show on This Corrosion every fucking Thursday for some fucking reason. But you know,
have you heard of Vinyl Terror and Horror?
No, but I love that name.
You've got to check them out.
Send that to me afterwards.
Yeah, Vinyl Terror and Horror. I learned about them from Daryl Hell. He's been trying to get them on the label that he works for.
Oh, nice.
There's some videos on there. What they do is, oh my God, so amazing.
Yeah.
So the way I describe it is, if you put Neubauten in the middle of World War I, when Dada was at its peak.
Into it?
Yeah, but all turntable.
Oh, sweet.
Right. So what they do is they deconstruct and reconstruct layers and layers of records and turntables for all kinds of just amazing, crazy sounds.
Well, that sounds up my alley.
Oh, like, absolutely. Yeah. I think if you go and just search Vinyl Terror and Horror and look for one of the videos, you'll be like,
this is my life now.
Yes. Yes.
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Anything conceptual. Totally fucking love it.
Most amazingly new thing in music that I have seen in ages.
I'll have to check them out.
There's nothing like it.
That's what we're all looking for, you know?
Yeah.
That's what we're always looking for, is the thing that, like, nothing like this exists.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I'm just absolutely fascinated by it. Yeah, I love it. And I played I had a show with Daryl a couple weeks ago, and I played a little clip of it. And he actually did the very challenging task of spinning their record. So they have a record that came out that is on one side a recording of their live performance, and on the other side a recreation of that performance by an orchestra.
Huh.
As best as could be replicated, with all the various, sounds, including intentional, skipping and scratching and
that's cool.
Whatnot. Like when you watch a video, they're just like, they'll have a record that they basically shattered a record and then glued a bunch of them back together again and play that. Or carve in a lot of grooves into it, or run a double needle, or
I love experimentation like that. Like I love prepared pianos and interesting use of percussion. I always find that stuff really fascinating.
Yeah, but it's also visual, right?
Yeah,
they've got this like artistic piece of this, all these different turntables kind of built on each other, and
that's so cool.
It is definitely.
I think I've actually seen some clips. I think somebody has sent me a clip of that. It's more of like a visual art installation kind of deal, right? Yeah, yes. I think who would have sent that to me? Somebody I know sent me a little short video.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. I don't think I actually listened to the audio though, because it was like one of those like, oh, I'm on my way to work in an Uber, like, oh, okay.
Yeah. One of the cool things about that, and this was something I had talked with Daryl about, was this. So he and I, when we did an interview, it was like 3 hours long because we just got talking about everything, and then we ended up having to stop it and say, okay, we'll do part 2 sometime later.
Yeah.
But he was talking about growing up in the Jersey Shore, and the types of people the types of music people listen to. And one of them was the Grateful Dead, and not that was his type of music, but he appreciated what they created, that they created this whole sense of the community and the experience as opposed to selling records. And they actually encouraged bootlegs.
Okay.
Right. And that people would literally use cassettes from different shows as like currency.
Yeah,
Like
I can see. I mean, that's what we did.
Right. Yeah. I've got the, the March 2 show from 1972. I'll trade you that for, XYZ.
Oh, dude,
right?
like that's like every fucking Joy Division fan because they had so many fucking bootlegs.
Yeah. And so that to me also is, I think, what vinyl terror and horror can be, because what they do, you cannot repeat that.
Yeah.
Right. So every show would be unique.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That would actually be really cool. Get your download the MP3s off your shitty phone recording.
Yeah.
That one person who brings in like a proper Zoom is like their recordings are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. Well, he would say that the Grateful Dead actually had like a section set aside for people that wanted to record.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And obviously they were not doing poorly.
No. Well, I mean, the Grateful Dead also had like a very interesting business model, and their fan base is very bizarre and strange. Like I full disclosure, never got into them, don't really understand them, but I have a lot of Deadhead friends who are like fucking hardcore into the Grateful Dead. They're one of those bands where like you either fucking love them or you're like ambivalent towards them. Yeah.
And what it is I think a lot of it is that it's an experience, and it's each one is unique. And that I think is something that's lacking in a lot of performances and bands today.
Yeah. Right? Well, I mean, the problem right now is that there's so much music being produced. There's so many people out there trying to make music. And this is a very unpopular opinion. And I know a lot of people get upset when I say this, but like a lot of people don't know their music history, and they don't know the etymology of music. They're afraid to explore outside of their interests. So as a result, you're getting a lot of derivative music because people are not actually listening to the things that the bands they love were listening to that influenced their own journey. So they're not. You can tell when a band is not being intellectually honest with themselves or creatively honest with themselves, because the quality of their music is very superficial. I would say 90% of the music that gets into my fucking inbox every week from promoters and from bands is derivative and boring and not interesting because they're not pushing themselves, and they're not being honest about their interests. I've always been unapologetically honest about my interests. I love certain things that a lot of people frown upon, and they don't understand the connection, which is really fascinating, because it's like you should know your history. And that's why we started doing the vinyl listening party, was because I wanted to give goths permission to listen to other music and to explore other ways of making music, other ways of listening to music, other ways of absorbing music. Because I think everybody wants to be the next fucking Bauhaus, but that's already existed. Why don't you do something different? Like there are eras for music because of limitations, for example, in the media. And that's why I'm so fascinated with like vaporwave, because vaporwave is a medium that or a music style or a genre that is trying to emulate and create, or trying to fabricate digital decay in the way that analog decay occurred on records and stuff. And so it's exploring, what does digital decay, how can you make digital decay sound cool? How can you make it sound pleasant? How can you make it an artifact unto itself? Because we have artifacts on analog, you can hear pops, on records. You can hear, squashing and stretching on tape when it's really old and it's, warping. But we don't really have that with digital, but we have our own kinds of decay. And, finding genres of music that are like exploring that kind of stuff, that's where music grows. That's how we move forward. When you got Ministry cutting and splicing and fucking around their tape bits and then literally taping them back together randomly, that's how they created some of the most iconic sounds on The Land of Grape and Honey. And not enough bands are doing that kind of exploration. They're all kind of like, I'm going to be the next this.
Yeah.
When they end up all sounding like you too.
Right. That's something that's bugged me for, I mean, growing up in the 80s, I was fortunate being in Chicago and having Wax Tracks. But I gravitated towards the bands that were Dada influenced.
Yeah.
So Cabaret Voltaire and Neubauten were two of my big ones, right? And you know, and then you know, there was so much experimentation that happened, right, over so many years, and it seems like a lot of that has gone. And so actually one of the things I ask people, or some people in my interviews is, you know, what is the new thing? What is the future of music? So if, you know, you have, you know, punk and industrial and, you know, electronic and all these that were just kind of like totally new things, it doesn't seem like there's been any totally new thing lately.
But there has been. Yeah. It's just people don't understand it, or it's too abstract for them. Like I said, vaporwave to me is a prime example of a brand new genre. Like there was a conversation happening on a group where somebody made this bold claim that there's been no new subcultures in 30 years. I'm like, bitch, vaporwave? Like, come on. The thing is that it's a lot harder now to kind of like, you know, experiment and get it out there, because there's so much oversaturation of stuff, and algorithms don't work in your favor if you're doing something new and experimental.
Right.
One thing I fucking love about the whole concept of like vaporwave is all of the subgenres. Like they've gone to the extreme of like Dadaist, where they're like, yeah, we've got fucking mall wave and pizza wave and Simpsons wave and all of this stuff, and it's just become this like amazing Dadaist parody of genre and subculture, you know. And I'm like, I'm fucking here for it because it's amazing and it's so weird and abstract. But I think the practical answer is, or the short answer is, algorithms. It makes it difficult to find, you know, what's happening. And so underground music scenes are kind of becoming a little bit more clever in how they market and how they kind of, you know, develop their marketing strategies to get their music out there.
That definitely is part of it. And I definitely need to look into vaporwave. I've heard of it, but I didn't know.
Well, Tuesday, clear your calendar. Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because we're listening to Macintosh Plus's Floral Shop, the seminal vaporwave album. Last week, I primed the audience by listening to Devo's New Traditionalists, which to me is the founding philosophy for vaporwave. And I'm just gonna talk about vaporwave, just what it is, what, you know, we're gonna explore it. It's a weird one. Is it highly listenable and catchy? Absolutely not. Sometimes it can be, but it's a very, very strange genre of music that I'm 100% on board with, and I think more people should be, because if you love music and you love exploration of sonic experiences, I think it does a good job of really presenting sonic experience in a brand new, interesting way. And it's not even brand new. It's been around for 10 years. But, you know, people are just starting to find it now, which I find really interesting.
Definitely. I want to check that out for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
And I think you're right with algorithms. And, you know, there's, I guess, there, you know, obviously 80s is popular. And everybody talks about that. You know, if you want to make it on Twitch, play 80s, right? Which leads to, you know, little exposure to something new. The one exception to that is Zlaya DJ. Have you ever seen his show on Tuesday?
No.
He does a fantastic show Tuesdays. For us, it starts 11 p.m. Because he's out in San Francisco. But he's originally from Yugoslavia before it broke up, and started, you know, his record collection there, and has been collecting, you know, since then. And so he pulls out stuff from, you know, all kinds of, he doesn't play just like the same things everybody else plays. Right. And he always has stories and information about all of these bands.
Oh, nice.
So very often, you know, I'm watching the show and it's like, oh, I don't remember them, or I've heard a lot from this band, but I never heard this song, or
Yeah,
they'll play a lot of like B-sides and things like that.
we call them the deep cuts.
Yeah. So he's one of those few out there that helps still expose. Like he did actually 2 weeks of exclusively Yugoslavian new wave post-punk.
Oh, nice! I actually did a listening party. I have a record of Soviet post-punk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Yugoslavian. And the interesting thing I got from my interview with him was that Yugoslavia had a very distinct position in world politics back then.
Right.
Is that they actually were practically at war with Soviet Union, but also not on great terms with the West.
Yeah.
And then eventually, war broke out and all that.
And then separate.
Yeah.
I remember when Yugoslavia separated.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember I was in the military then. Luckily I didn't go there, but I know people that did.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who had family there. It was like absolutely crazy.
Yeah. But that's like, where bands like Laibach and all that, Borghesia, as he says, got their start.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of, and then he introduced some other bands. Like one of the ones that was really popular is a band called Paraf, P-A-R-A-F.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so we played a lot of that stuff.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So they're definitely good shows, and I'm always pushing people to, go to some of these, whether it's, it's somebody is doing something really different and interesting.
Yeah.
Like what you do is definitely very, very interesting. I love that you get into the history in terms of like what was the inspiration, because no band started from nothing, right?
Well, that's it exactly. And no genre started out of nothing.
Right.
Everything has a clear line.
Exactly.
And there's so many artists that have all had very similar influences, but they sound very radically different from each other. And I think that's kind of like what facilitated me to do that show, was to kind of like demonstrate to all young music makers, bands that are kind of like forming, or bands that are, in their intermediate stage, come watch the show, learn that you can also explore your sound. Just because you also love Lou Reed and you also love David Bowie doesn't mean you have to sound exactly the same as, this band or whatever. I think that it's super fucking important that we know our history and we're given permission to like other things. It's kind of sad that it takes like some schlocky clown on the internet to say, no, it's okay if you like Paul Simon. I fucking love him too. Like, doesn't make you less goth. Yeah. In fact, it makes you a better informed goth, know?
Yeah.
I think limiting yourself as an artist, you can tell when you've limited yourself. You can tell when you produced work that's limiting. And I'm not talking like limiting yourself with like the limitations of which you can operate. I mean, creatively limiting yourself. I think that is very important to have an eclectic, broad sense of seeing the world, because then you produce better work. I think it's like, how good is your work going to be if you want to paint, for example, landscapes of Scotland, of Glasgow, like your background photo, but you've never been there before, then how do you know you're capturing the essence of Glasgow? You might draw a nice little rendition that you found from a photo off the internet, but unless you've smelled the street, walked over some dude who's passed out with a pasty hanging out of his mouth, like you'll never know. And I think that
even just tried to speak with a Glaswegian.
Or even just try to communicate to somebody. Yeah, exactly.
I remember the first time I went out and I went to a coffee shop or something and people were talking. I'm like, I'm in Scotland, right? They speak English here. Why don't I understand what anybody is saying?
Yeah, I remember I had an internet friend that I knew for many years on LiveJournal from Glasgow. And the first year I did Edinburgh Fringe, she came up and we hung out for a day. And like, I have known her for years. We turned on to the Facebook we transitioned over to Facebook on chat on Messenger. And then the first time we sat down and had a drink together, I'm like, I don't understand you. I was like, oh my God, but I've bared my soul to you on the internet. I have no idea what you're saying right now.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to these shows you do where you talk about the history. I'm curious of, do you spend a lot of time doing research on that, or is that just something that you've picked up over the years?
So my kind of background involves having a music education. I studied piano. I have the equivalent to I guess like a bachelor's degree in that. It's not technically, because it's not a university. It was not a university-based program. Yeah. And I did study music very, very heavily. And so I kind of already came into popular music with a very strong background in the history of Western music. Never really, unfortunately, got to explore Eastern music. My sister did. My sister studied music in university, so she explored other histories of musical etymology. So I'm primarily Western music and based in my knowledge. And so I've always just kind of been really interested in learning about everything that I'm interested in. So if I'm like, I fucking love goth music, so I'm going to learn everything I can about goth music academically, because I'm just a weirdo that way. I can also tell you absolutely everything you never wanted to know about the gunfight at the OK Corral. My brain doesn't discern what I'm interested in. It just decides what it's interested in, and then it fucking runs with it. So, I love reading nonfiction. So primarily I would read books about the inception and fall of factory records, or that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's all kind of knowledge I've amassed over years. And so when I'm doing the shows, I will write notes for myself so I don't kind of go off too off topic, but sometimes I go off topic. But generally it's just stuff I know that I want to just talk about. The listening party really started as an accident, because I only wanted to Twitch stream like once a week, because I was, still fooling myself thinking I was going to have a job to go back to. And Day Drunk was obviously the more well thought out show in terms of direction, how to make it a fun money making show. That one is a show that was designed to make money. I designed my character for it very specifically. And I was doing a show because last year was the 40th anniversary of Ian Curtis's death. And I was like, well, I was going to do a live show, like an actual DJ set somewhere. And I was like, well, I guess I can't do that now. So, well, I know a lot about Joy Division, and I have all this fucking media. So why don't I just do a show talking about his life and death? Yeah. And so it ended up being this 4-hour show. We ended up biting off way more than we could chew with the technology we had. I tried to spin my first press of Unknown Pleasures. I had tapes. I had all kinds of stuff. We had visuals, and it blew up my broadcast computer, literally in the middle of the show. Wow. So I felt so bad that our show was a bust. I mean, we still managed to keep about 100 people watching, and I had only started on Twitch. My Day Drunk shows were only getting 30 people. So that was the biggest audience I had at the time. And I'm like, oh my God, I just fucked up everything. So I said the next day, I was like, hey guys, all you troopers that sat through this fucking, and I mean, I've scripted it. We're remounting it this year. So May 18th this year, I'm doing Isolation 2.0. It's going to be fucking amazing. But I had done all these visuals that were tied to music. It was going to be amazing. And then it exploded, literally, our computer, our interface, something exploded and was to never be seen from again. So I said to my audience the next day, I was like, hey, you all sat through this. How about I do a listening party for my first press of Unknown Pleasures? Because I have a rare press. It's a pie pressing that's translucent red. So I was like, we'll walk you through the thing and let's listen to it. And I had just as many people show up for that, and they were really excited. Yeah. And some people hadn't made the show the previous day, so I kind of did a little intro talking about just the record itself, not the band or as much detail as I went to on the Isolation show. And then people just asked me to keep doing it. And so the next album I did was Bauhaus. I think I did In the Flat Field. And then I just kind of went through all the big goth albums.
Yeah.
And so people were like, this is awesome. Like I had no idea that,
Right.
you know, Bathhouse was inspired by dub, and, you know, that Ian Curtis went to reggae bars. Like,
Yeah.
whoa. So then I started to think, well, maybe I should actually make this a regular show to encourage people to learn more about where their music comes from. And then it's now branched out into like all, like, you know, we've done all kinds of stuff. That's like, I always bring it back to goth or goth adjacent.
Yeah.
But yeah, the show ended up just taking off on its own. And in retrospect, I think it was a good move in terms of branding and marketing, because Day Drunk is a really fucking silly show. And I'm basically a confident idiot that just takes it to the, you know, to the nth degree. And I'm not serious, and it's not cool. Like and by cool, I mean, it's not like me all shrouded in black playing like, you know, Bela Lugosi's dead for 7 hours, you know, with candles everywhere. It's not like, I'm not doing a cool club night. It's just me like being zany with a roller coaster background kind of thing. So having another show to buttress the stupidity with like seriousness, I think was kind of a good move too. And people seem to like, I hate to say it, but like seem to take me more seriously now as a DJ.
Yeah, you're not one-dimensional.
Yeah, because I find a lot in the DJ scene, because it's so oversaturated, and there are a lot of people that, you know, just started DJing on Twitch who've never DJed clubs before. There seems to be this weird, interesting divide in the DJ scene where they're kind of like, you're not a real DJ, you don't really know what you're doing or whatever. Like, I don't necessarily buy that. I think it's great to see people doing new stuff and exploring things outside of their comfort zone. It's literally how I started DJing, was on a dare. Yeah. So I think it's also kind of like, it is kind of interesting that people are like, oh, you really do know what you're talking about. You know, now it's kind of like, interesting. That's like, you know, it's interesting how you see me having fun and, you know, doing silly mixes as not being technically proficient, but me, you know, leading a listening party where I literally just do radio style DJing between the sets. I'm something more legitimate doing this.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things I've noticed over the past year is that a lot of people do like to hear a little bit more from DJs. Whether it's you know, their own personal story or a little history, background, you know, of a band or a song, or, you know, and again, that's one of the reasons why a lot of us that are there every Tuesday night for Zaya is because it's always like a class.
Well, and that's I think that's a good move on their part, because that's how I treat listening party. It's like, you're going to learn something on this show. You're going to listen for things when we play the record, and then you're going to report back to the class afterwards what you heard.
But he also does the same thing with doing a fun night, because on Fridays they do cocktail twins.
Nice.
Right. You know, him and another guy, you know, and they're, well, in both shows they're often drinking a lot, but, you know.
This goes with the territory.
Yeah. I was also going to mention that in my interview with Ms. Margot, she commented that one of the reasons why she started DJing was, you know, all these goths that were, you know, only listening to this, you know, current music and didn't know their history. It's like, well, you know, if you like this, you probably like this band.
Yeah.
And so that's how she got started.
Yeah, I kind of just started DJing on a dare, thinking it would be the only hobby I could ever have, because everything I've ever done for fun has turned into a career, and god damn it, this is my fucking job now.
But I also want to mention that you like reading about music. Are you familiar with Stephen Mallander's thesis?
What's Stephen Mallander's thesis?
Yeah. Well, he wrote a PhD thesis. So Stephen Mallander is a PhD.
That's crazy. What did he write his thesis on?
On evolution of music.
That's interesting. I would totally love to read. Would that be in the public?
Yeah, if you go in and search for it, Stephen Mallander thesis, you'll find
That's funny.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly the name of it, but he goes through. I haven't read it. I have it. I want to read it. And then, of course, I want to find a way that I can do research with him because, well, yeah.
That's filing things into my brain that I didn't know about people. Much
Yeah.
like this morning, I found out that Will Smith is a Scientologist. I'm like, what the fuck?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
It's like, Stephen Mallender has a PhD. Dr. Mallender.
Yep. And he teaches occasionally.
Well, I know that Martin from Attrition is a professor at university in Coventry. He teaches music production because we met in Toronto a couple of years ago, and then we were supposed to hang out while I was on tour in Europe, and then that never really happened because my schedule got really fucked up. But like we chat every once in a while, and he was telling me that he was like a university prof, and I'm like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Professor Attrition.
Martin Atkins has been teaching for years at Millikan University.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in fact, he just sent out an email talking about scholarships for next year's class. And that was one of the most surreal moments. So being, an entrepreneurship academic, we have conferences, and I saw a conference coming up where he was actually a keynote speaker. And
That's crazy.
Wait, because I saw the name and the picture hadn't loaded yet. I'm like, no, couldn't be. And there was Martin Atkins. And then a little while later, I was at Cold Waves and he was just hanging out, and I went up and talked to him. And so we're at Cold Waves listening to something industrial, and I'm talking with Martin Atkins about teaching entrepreneurship. And that was just like the most surreal moment of like my worlds colliding. And so, this is where that shirt comes from.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, I've never really like kind of felt like starstruck or that kind of stuff because like the people I've always admired, in my industry, nobody fucking knows who they are. And I remember like the first time I was hanging out with Jean-Michel, Paré from the Flying Dutchman, I was just like, oh my God. But then I realized, oh, wow, he's like some dude from Quebec who loves to do like woodworking, and he loves my corsetry, and we like chat now all the time about like our fun hobbies that we do.
Right.
I think, we always forget that like they're real people too, and we're all real people too,
Yeah. And that's so I love going to Cold Waves in Chicago because they have after parties downstairs. So the Chicago, the Metro has, the venue upstairs, and then downstairs is another club, bar. And so that's where everybody goes. Well, not everybody, a lot of people go afterwards. And every year that I've gone, every night, I've ended up like chatting with somebody.
Yeah.
For like an hour. Like I sat at the bar chatting politics with Jack Dangers one night.
Well, cool.
Yeah, and that was fun. A year and a half ago, we were sitting at a table with Test Department.
Oh man, that would have been fucking amazing.
Yeah, that was fun.
I love them so much.
And of course, that same year, I talked to Shannon Funches. Like she was there every night, and so
nice.
Talked to her every night. And then I just finally got an interview with her earlier this week.
I feel like that's what like the internet has become during this pandemic.
Yeah.
Like it blows my mind that I've just become friends with like artists that I really admire and like know and love. Like literally 2 nights ago, Josh from Syzygizzix and I were like sending voice messages to each other in Italian, and then I was talking to his mom, like just like, hey, how's it going? Like literally just like shit talking in Italian in voice clip. And like it's just like even like meeting, Barrett from Boot Blacks. I'm like, it's just like wacky and wild that you're really like now we're just chatting with people. Like, I remember Barrett coming into one of my Day Drunk shows and just like heckling me. I'm like, who the fuck is that? Kind of thing. I'm like, ah. And you're like, wow, like
definitely active on Twitch. Yeah.
And it's crazy that you're like meeting, you get to meet all these people that and love. Like I saw the Boot Blacks video, a friend of mine sent it to me where they were doing the Perfect Strangers thing.
And
I wasn't really into their music at the time. And I was kind of like, these guys are okay. I guess they're like post-punky, whatever. Their newest album though is fucking amazing. But at the time I was kind of like, I don't love them, but like that's really funny and they're fucking hilarious. I love them. And then I think like Barrett saw the video I had made of my partner and I were just setting up for a show one day. And whenever I do Autobahn, when I'm DJing, he has this driving background.
Mhm.
So I was like, and I had this mini, like, I think it was like some mini little, chord keyboard or something. And we had the background going on for some reason on his computer. And I was like, I just turned on that really awful Vanessa Carlton song and then like, did a video of myself pretending to play the piano while I'm driving down the street in the background. And so we posted that. And then like Barrett had saw that. He's like, okay, now this person's really cool. I like the cut of her gym. And that's when we kind of started chatting. Because he was like, that video is fucking hilarious. And I was like, your video was hilarious. Like, oh, we have senses of humor. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic has kind of created this beautiful melting pot for artists to get to know each other. Like Albie from Scary Black and I have become meme dudes where we're like, oh, we're both dank memers. Yes. So we'll like send each other like really terrible memes to see if we can out meme the other person. These are the kind of nuanced relationship building tools that you don't get when you're at a club, or you don't get when you see somebody play. And I think it's really awesome that we're having that ability to connect as an industry now in such a nice informal way, where it's not like people being thirsty bitches, or like getting that 5 minutes to see somebody. You can actually develop and cultivate and learn about other people, so you're not learning about one-dimensional sides of them. It's like you're actually learning that they like certain things that you like, and that's really cool too, or they have certain political beliefs as you do as well, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's why one of the reasons I do these interviews, because even though a lot of DJs can talk between songs sometimes, or type in chat, it's still not really like an in-depth conversation to get to know people, and so with all these interviews, people are getting to know each other, but this whole sense of community that's really come about because of Twitch has been, I think, one of the greatest positives of this pandemic.
Yeah, and it's very surprising for me because, again, my industry, street performing, has always been very close-knit community, very tight-knit. We're like a big dysfunctional family. And I found that like through the pandemic, we all got so kind of like in our heads and ourselves that like I was very genuinely surprised that community wasn't like, a bunch of us still have group chats, but it's not like as a whole community we haven't come together. Like, and that's weird to me because we're the community that if somebody gets injured on tour, we all come together and do a benefit show to help pay for their the recovery time. And so going through this pandemic genuinely surprised me that my community didn't really come together stronger as I would expect them to. But the music community has just been phenomenal and blowing my mind with how, especially with all of the fundraising that Twitch DJs do, the kindness, the generosity, the willingness to work together, and the professionalism has been such a breath of fresh air, and it's been incredible to see. Like, I'm so proud of the Goths. Like I remember being in a chat on one of the street performing pages, and one of my colleagues, who I love dearly, but who's also kind of can be a biting asshole for no reason, made a dig at the Goths. And I was kind of like, dude, you know what? The Goths, they fucking showed up and raised money for Covent Garden. And, I didn't ask any of them to DJ for me because we wanted to keep it with the street performing community. I wanted to get the Goths involved, but the other DJs were kind of like, no, we should keep it with us. And like, they still showed up. They still raided after their shows. They still dropped some money. They still talked about it. Like, I've done as much as I can to help other, DJs. I will do fundraisers for other people. I even taught a class on how to deal with hecklers, because a lot of DJs were having problems with hecklers for the first time in their lives because they're now, front facing instead of in a DJ booth. And I went out of my way. I was like, I'm not charging you anything. I will absolutely do a Zoom meeting. We'll learn about how to deal with hecklers. And like, I think that it's amazing that we are all so committed to working together. It's so nice to see that,
Yeah. And So this is one of the reasons why I think this has dramatically changed the whole music industry,
Yeah.
right? People are saying, when things get back to normal, it's not. This is our conceptions of music consumption and entertainment have changed.
Yes, I firmly believe it has changed.
Yeah.
I think it's also kind of cool how oh shit, what's happening here? Sorry, I actually have to get going.
Oh, okay.
Because apparently the anti-maskers are making their way down Spadina, and I have an activation to get involved in.
All right. Okay, so really quickly before you go and
Yes.
and give them a proper welcoming, what gives you hope, if anything?
Knowing that my existence on this planet is but a mere blip, and if I can just leave it better than I found it, that's always been my goal. That's what gives me hope, is knowing that I can make an effect on other people's lives while they're still here and make them feel happy. My number one concern going into twitching was, keep people happy, keep people distracted, and keep people entertained. And if I can continue to do that, that's a better legacy than anything I can think of. And what gives me hope is seeing people be happy.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine also just what you've seen with people coming together and helping.
Yeah, the community, I mean, community doesn't really give me hope because I have lots of, experiences with the negative side of community. But I think that what we're building on Twitch is fucking amazing. That gives me hope for the future of music, and that gives me hope for the future of the music industry. But yeah, I would say what gives me hope is just seeing people smile, seeing people being happy, and occasionally getting that piece of fan mail saying like, you made my day. I was having a shitty day. I turned into your show. You made me laugh. That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me doing my shows, is just knowing that I've made somebody laugh,
Yeah. And it is just as a last kind of point for people to pay attention to, what people are saying in chat, because I've noticed plenty of times that people are calling out for help, but not directly.
Yeah.
So just kind of, be aware of that and be supportive when you can.
Yeah. It's hard because people are not going to explicitly say, I'm having a bad time right now.
Right.
Nobody ever fucking says that.
Well, and sometimes people will directly say that, and then people like, oh, that's just a joke. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Somebody is
it's a nuanced thing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But anyway,
keep them entertained.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. I think you do a great job with what you're doing. I enjoy it. I don't get to catch a lot of what you do because it kind of overlaps with my teaching, but
time zones, I understand it. It's a challenge, overall.
Yeah. But I catch what I can. A lot of times I'll have my office hours on Zoom, and I'll have you on one of my screens.
And if there's no context to the music, you're probably wondering, like, why is she eating mayonnaise on camera?
Well, yeah, it's very easy that if somebody comes into my office hours, which students usually don't bother, I could just quickly mute and then easy enough.
Professional.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And whenever this airs, we will probably most likely be rating into one of your shows, and we'll discuss that.
Oh, awesome.
So let me stop here.